And I'm excited to have with us today as a special guest, Dr. Kent Pekel of ISD535, the Rochester Public Schools. And thank you for coming along today for a session, Dr. Pekel. Good to meet you and talk to you.
Yeah, well, it's good to be with you, Wes. I do have to say, interestingly, people sometimes say that when you come to the school board meetings, you pronounce my name wrong. And in fact, you pronounce my name like my grandparents pronounced my name, which was Pekel. And then my dad, when he was a pastor, he was in a church where it was mostly African-American for a part of his career, and they pronounced it Pastor Pekel. And so I answer to either. So you're not actually pronouncing it wrong. I had Grandma and Grandpa Pekel in Wisconsin that I grew up in, who I loved very much. So for the record, Wes Lund is not mispronouncing my name. He's pronouncing the previous generation's version of it.
It's funny. I always thought I was pronouncing it correctly. I wasn't saying it wrong intentionally. For those who don't know, it's the interference from too many foreign languages that I have on my English speaking that influence.
Yeah.
Takes me back
You're saying it like it's spelled Pekel. Looks like Pekel. I'm mostly Norwegian, but somebody married someone who was Dutch somewhere in history, so it's a Dutch name. And anyway, I answer to all, and it's great to be here. So thank you for the chance to talk.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure for me too. And a lot of people will be surprised at this, but let's get right into it. What is something that you'd like people to know about you that you don't often have a chance to share because you're caught up with other activities? But what's something that you'd like people to know? Like, are you a virtuoso on the guitar or something, or what?
Wow, something that I would like people to know about me personally that I would like people to know. That's a really good question. I was thinking you were meaning something about my job or my profession. I would say
your profession or whatever you feel better about sharing.
Well, I'll probably think of a personal one, but I think an appropriate thing, Wes, for me to mention, because I think you're right, that some folks may be surprised that we're having this conversation, but I think something I want people to know about me is I consider the job of superintendent truly to be somebody whose job is bridging the whole community, all perspectives. And I think I actually value all perspectives, and I don't take even really serious criticism personally. So I think even though you certainly have had some critical things to say about some things we're doing, I welcome that. That makes us better, and it's critical to have that perspective about a public school district. It's a public trust, and we need to have all sides. And so I haven't had the chance to say that as much. And so it's nice to be able to convey that.
I appreciate that a lot too, because it's no fun being vilified. I can tell you.
There are times I might disagree, but I'd rather have you doing what you regularly do, which is raising, your perspectives or other perspectives, because then we can hear them, learn from them, sometimes respond to them, argue with them, that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's all about free speech. So was there a thing that you had that you wanted people to know that you don't often get a chance to share? Like, do you collect baseball cards or something, or?
You won't be surprised. I'm a pretty inveterate nerd. I read fairly voraciously. I am a news junkie. I try my best as I get further into my last part of my 50s to stay in somewhat decent shape. So I try and get to the Rochester Athletic Club at 5:30 in the mornings if I can, and do things like that. And people often see me there not looking my best, but that's fine. So those are kind of the things. It's my kids are all in either college or out in the work world, and so it's just me and my wife and our dog here in Rochester. But they come home and visit every once in a while, and so that's kind of my existence, and a lot of time in this job, which I really enjoy.
And when you're reading for enjoyment, is there a genre? Do you prefer, say, fiction to nonfiction? Or if it's nonfiction, are you into history and culture and languages and literature?
Definitely way on the nonfiction side, a lot of history, a lot of current affairs. I want to get back to fiction. When I was younger, I used to read more fiction, and now I really don't. I've always got this backlog of books and things that I'm, trying to get through. And so um, I have the aspiration to get back into fiction at some point, but now it's pretty much the kind of stuff that a lot of people would never want to pick up, but that for some reason for me um, is enjoyable and a kind of a distraction from stuff.
And nonfiction is sometimes stranger than fiction, isn't it? Actual
Yeah.
history
Yeah,
is more entertaining.
it's incredible.
I mean, I find Herodotus to be a real page turner, and I really like, Ariane or one of the other historians. But I've tried to plow through a lot of works of fiction, but if it's not something that's sort of 18th or 19th century, I don't find it to be real meaty,
Oh, you are more hardcore than I am. It's funny, I just came out of a meeting with our maintenance union. We have what's called meet and confer, where I meet with each union. And Curtis Marquardt, who's one of our custodians, who's the president of maintenance, he's like you. His reading, I'm like, what are you reading? Oh, Herodotus. Or like he's and he really is reading this stuff. And it's fun when I see him. He floats among schools, so I never know where I'm going to see him. And whenever I see him, he's like reading, Dostoevsky or something. And so we have a lot of great staff in RPS. And Curtis, when he was doing a rotation in our administration building, came in my office and saw the books. And that started the whole, like 3 years ago, ongoing discussion about what's he reading and like what's going on. So very good guy, but you and he read heavier stuff than I do, I think.
Yeah. I'm not. I tried to read Dostoevsky, but I got lost. Put it down on about page 848.
Oh, you made it farther than I did.
Brothers Karamazov and all that, But when you are, do you have any favorite aspects of American culture or history? Any moments you tune in on? I mean, for me, it started with the Vietnam War and so forth, and I did a lot of reading about Kissinger and then worked backwards from there.
That's interesting. I would say World War II right now and kind of ongoing. The book I just finished is called Commander in Chief, and it was about FDR and his generals and how he brilliantly managed during World War II these, legendary generals who themselves went on, in the case of people like, Eisenhower to be president and things, but that Roosevelt was a master at getting the best out of these men. They were all men at that critical moment in history. And so it was a big, thick book, but it was a fascinating read. And I'm really interested in that era. There was so much happening that was, going on. And the house we bought here in Rochester was built in 1950, and I sort of like that era. It's an interesting era of kind of post-World War II Eisenhower America, like things growing, things expanding, also social change happening, coming out of World War II. So yeah, I think that would be an ongoing interest for me.
Excellent. What current events are you following in the world that you feel are not being given enough attention? Seems lately everyone's talking about this CEO mystery out of New York and Manhattan, but that's captivating everybody. But is there something else that you're watching as well as that, or?
Well, literally today, as you and I are talking on December 11th, 2024, I have been a bit following what's happening in Syria, because I think it could be quite influential. We'll never know. It's interesting that President-elect Trump is saying we should stay out of it. We should stay out of it. And I understand that. I remember vividly a time when my dad, who since passed away, told me after the invasion of Kuwait, he said, I think Bush is going to invade Iraq. And I remember thinking that's impossible. That'll never happen. That's impossible. Well, of course it did. And so when something like a long-standing dictator like Assad topples in Syria, and it's right next to Israel, which is a powder keg, and the Israelis conduct a sweeping intervention to destroy the Syrian military infrastructure with lightning speed. And Russia has been engaged there. That's a possible powder keg. There's so many things. The Iranians have been there. It's had ties to Hezbollah and Al Qaeda, and so that like the Syria, and then it happened so fast that at least from the outside looking in, we don't have a lot of information, of course, in the U.S. public on what's going on in a place like Syria. So maybe it was not as fast if you were there, but it seems like with blistering speed, the government just toppled. And because it's right next to Israel with everything that's going on with Gaza, that's definitely one to watch, where we think, oh God, that's far from us, it's not going to influence us. But we know from history, what seems far can suddenly be very close pretty quickly.
Iranian drones over New Jersey, for instance.
Well, that would be a very, very far-reaching consequence of something like this. But yeah, that's one thing that I've been sort of thinking about a little bit. I had like a 15 minutes to eat lunch, and I looked at my phone and was interested to see what was happening over there.
Yeah, it's a lot of things happening in the world right now. And what would you tell folks you'd like them to know about their tax increases now that the referendum has passed? It's kind of on a lot of people's minds.
We are going to be scrupulous in spending the money just like we said we were going to spend the money, which sounds obvious but doesn't always happen in something like this. We are going to have a dashboard where you're going to be able to track every expenditure. So we said, for instance, we were going to spend slightly more than $5 million on school counselors. We are going to spend slightly more than $5 million on school counselors, and we're going to account for it. We are also in the midst right now, as we speak, of a really important discussion about changing the way we fund and staff our schools in Rochester. We are a very centralized school district historically, where a lot of the decision making sits where I sit. And what I want to do is pivot that so that we still have a common educational program across the system, but that schools have more flexibility to make decisions with the dollars and staffing at the school level, because our schools are very different from each other. So we are in the midst of designing what we call the balanced budget model, or BBM is what I named it. And the school board is going to vote on January 7th. While we have been designing that, we have been very, very attentive to the referendum that we just passed to be sure that as we change our funding model, we don't let any of those commitments that were made in the referendum get undermined or downplayed or lost, and that we can show the public exactly how those dollars are being used. Interestingly, there's nothing in Minnesota law that requires a school district to do that. You could just take the money and put it in the general fund pot, and it just becomes part of the general funding. But I don't think it's exactly the same, because the voters voted for it in a different way than they do the money we get from the state of Minnesota or the feds. And so we're going to account for it. And I think it's going to matter tremendously. I know that if it hadn't passed, we would be getting ready to cut up to 20 million for next year. And that would be brutal. We cut 21 million my first 2 years, and to do another 20 would be, 156 people who were here when I got here are no longer employed by RPS, and it would have been another cut of that level. So I'm very grateful. But I also understand that we have to use those dollars well. And people are going to hold us accountable for it, and they should.
So can I take a tiny victory lap? Maybe some of my speeches at the Truth in Taxation meeting had an impact, or did I?
Absolutely. In a certain sense, fiscal conservatism in terms of using money well, I would hope would be a universally held value. Now, I don't mean fiscal conservatism necessarily for somebody who doesn't want to spend any money on schools, but I just think it's hard to argue with dollars not being used efficiently to educate kids. So, having a robust discussion about are we doing that effectively or not is part of the job, I think.
You're a definite improvement from Dolly Mon.
Well, who I've never met, so I'll simply say I'm glad to be here.
Good. Okay. What's something that you'd like to share about the curriculum in ISD 535? Is there a special aspect?
Reading. I'm really excited. We are completely changing our reading curriculum this year. We laid the groundwork the previous 2 years. We have a brand new curriculum K through 5. We are bringing back what is called the science of reading by many, and for many of us, it's bringing back phonics, bringing back teaching little kids, and older kids if they can't read well, to decode words and using the sounds to make the words. For a couple decades in American education, we really went away from that. And it was really guided by this idea that it's not very interesting for kids, it's not very engaging. And we literally taught kids, it was under the name balanced literacy usually. We taught kids that you could guess what the word meant by the first letter, or you could literally look at the picture and figure it out. You're teaching them to guess the context. And kids can do that. Kids are smart, but they can only they're pretending to read. They're not really reading. And then as they go up in the grades, it has catastrophic implications for them because they don't have that foundational skill of what we call phonemic awareness. Like I know the sounds, the B makes the B sound, and then I can begin to put it together and make letters. That's just one aspect. It's a massive change. And so we've adopted a new curriculum. We've adopted new short tests that are designed to help teachers identify kids that are struggling. So not the big state tests that take months to get back, but the kid takes it and you get the result. And we're training our teachers, and our teachers are being heroic. They're doing this in the midst of teaching kids. You know, they don't get to stop doing their job and learn a new way to teach. They got to do both at the same time. So that's the thing I'm most excited about with our curriculum work that's going on. And it's the biggest change in curriculum since I've been here in Rochester. We've also adopted a new science curriculum that's going to roll out next year, but we haven't started that one. So those are the two biggies that are, and there's other curricular areas like math that we need to get into that we haven't started that work since I've been in Rochester.
Mm-hmm. And so Dr. Seuss is a useful book to be reading in elementary school, probably, right?
Yes, there are a couple of Dr. Seuss books, as I know you know, that have been, and Dr. Seuss himself, before he died, said, yeah, there's some, cultural and racial images that are not very inclusive, but the vast majority of Dr. Seuss is not only well aligned with our educational goals, but kids love it. And so absolutely, we do have Dr. Seuss in Rochester Public Schools. In fact, I bring books out to elementary schools when I go read to kids, and I always have 1 or 2 Dr. Seuss books as an option. So,
perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. A lot of people would want me to ask you a question about the tax referendum in the hopes that maybe are we going to see more tax referendums in the future? Or do you think this will suffice for a while? Will things even off in terms of expenditures?
Two things. This is where, as you know well, because you are a frequent visitor in our school board meetings, I work for a school board, and I'm not on the school board. I do not plan to recommend another school referendum. I don't personally see the need. I believe that we have been given by our community financial stability. We were not given new funding to grow. We were given stability. But that's huge. I mean, Anoka Hennepin School District up in the cities, they just announced cutting 200 positions for next year. And so, and we have districts right around us that are really in financial distress. So I think our community has given us the gift of stability. I have to say too, none of us saw the COVID pandemic coming like 5 years ago, or whatever it was. So never say never, but I do not plan to recommend another referendum, and I don't see the need for another referendum. School board member, and I have had no conversations with school board members that suggest they do either. So actually, I don't mean to seem like ominous, like, well, what is the board? We have not got that in our plan to go back to our community for additional referendum funding. We are deeply grateful for what's there, and we have to be financially disciplined as we go forward. And the biggest challenge for school districts is maintaining the right number of staff. All of our money is people, basically, except for transportation routes and utilities. And we got to make sure that we stay disciplined, that the number of staff that we hire is tied to the number of kids we're privileged to serve. And so that's just going to be a critical thing, because there's a lot of school districts, including to some extent Rochester before I got here, that have hired staff at a rate that far exceeded the growth in student enrollment. And the money follows the kids. So those two lines have to move together, or you get into trouble down the road.
Can we talk a moment about the transgender procedure that's in
Sure.
place? People would think I'm being too nice if I didn't at least ask about it. How does that work in terms of, maybe with some granularity? Can you describe the procedure?
Yes. Yes, and let me tell you first of all where it came from. And we are not proactively, either at my level or at the classroom level, going out and urging kids to grapple with issues of gender identity. We are entirely in passive mode here, receipt mode. We're meeting the needs of kids who come into our schools, and it's a very, very, very small number. And we are living through a period of major social change in how to support those kids. And so when some of the questions arose a couple years ago, around things like bathroom use or use of a pronoun, it became clear to me that I needed to give some level of clarity to it. And so I issued some administrative guidelines that were administrative guidelines because we knew the federal government was going to issue new Title IX guidance, and we were waiting for that. And that is definitely a matter, as I know you know, of legal battles right now, and we will follow the law based on what happens. So we had to figure out what to do here in Rochester, and so I issued those guidelines, and they really were common sense guidelines to support those students. And it meant that, yes, we do allow a student to express the gender identity that they identify with in our schools. We also, if another student and their parent or caregiver, of course, has concerns about, for instance, being in a locker room with that student, we will make alternative arrangements for that student. We have said that at any time a parent or guardian requests information about how their student is expressing gender identity in our school, we must provide it if we possess it. But we've also said we won't go on a fishing expedition if we don't possess any information. Like, I want our teachers teaching reading and math, not worrying about like gender identity. So, and there are places, entire states, that have prohibited answering those parent questions. I said from the beginning, we'll answer the parent questions. We also, in our procedure, do not prohibit a teacher or a counselor or a social worker from talking to a parent about a student's gender identity if they are concerned. And we don't mandate that our staff talk to parents about any particular issue except child abuse, which is mandatory reporting. That's the law. So if you think a kid is depressed, we trust a teacher to talk to their kid's parent or their counselor. If we think a kid is having anxiety, we say that. If we think a kid is a math genius and they're taking classes that are too easy, we expect the teacher to talk to the parent. So similarly, if a teacher, a counselor, a principal has concerns about how a kid is doing related to those issues of gender identity, there's nothing in our procedure that prohibits that. And as you know, there was some suggestion that we were prohibiting it. We don't prohibit it. We also don't police it. You know, we're not trying to elevate this issue, but we are privileged to respond to the kids. And I think the last thing I'd say, Wes, is there was a moment where I was walking through the hallways of a building in Rochester outside our school district, and a woman about my age recognized me and stopped me, and she started crying. And she said, "My child is transgender, just graduated from one of the high schools in Rochester, and I have no doubt my child would not be alive today if your school had not been so supportive and inclusive." And she was in tears, and so I get a little choked up because I don't have that life experience of that parent. She wanted to support her student and said that our school's handling of that was so important to avoid having that student want to hurt themselves.
Mhm.
And so that has like stayed in my head. We are really committed to serve those kids, but we are taking a really common sense approach. And I have to say the final thing, because it comes up, we are not involved in gender conversion issues at all. Like we do not, get in, every once in a while I get an email that suggests that we are involved in some of the debates about the medical treatment of transgender issues. That's far outside our schools. We are about teaching the kids, and we do make accommodations so that students can express their gender identity in a way that we seek to affirm, just like we seek to affirm all kids' identities. So longer answer, but complex question. And thanks for the chance to try and walk through that approach that we're taking.
I always, as a host, I have a kind of a more ancient concept of what it means to be a host that I think you've traveled in foreign countries, so you probably know what I mean by the guest host relationship. So, my life has been saved by Muslims in the middle of nowhere. And, in Africa or in the Middle East, I've been helped tremendously in Asia. So I'm not, I have a concept of having a guest. So I'm not here to jump you in a sense, as people would expect, you know, and those are people who never turn up for anything anyway. So I have, that's my defense of myself to them, is that go ahead and you be the person, you be your best you
Yeah.
in terms of turning up for a public debate. But thank you for your candid answer. And then another thing a lot of people have been talking about in groups is, pardon me, I'm shivering because it's really cold in this particular room. I keep this room locked up most of the time, unless I'm doing a podcast.
Got
It's
it.
very cold. But people have been talking a lot about your raise that came into play. Would you care to comment on that a little bit about your raise that happened?
Well, I am very privileged to make a good salary. I compare everything to my first year teaching salary from long ago, just mentally. And so I understand, I make a good salary. The raise that I'm getting is less than all of our other bargaining units have gotten since I've been in Rochester, far less, but that's a percentage. So, when you make a superintendent salary, a percentage increase is more money, but it's lower than that. When we looked at the school districts that are our size, they serve 10,000 or more in Minnesota, and we looked at superintendent total compensation, because you can't just look at the salary. There's the benefits, there's stuff like a car allowance, and all of this, is in every school district because it's a competitive market for talent. I was the lowest paid, and now with the contract that you're referencing, I'm the second to lowest of those. Now the others are all up in the Twin Cities. I'm grateful for it. The school board offered me that amount. I did not, I accepted it without change. I'm grateful for it. And as I say, as a percentage, it's below what all of our other employee groups got. But I don't overplay that, because a lower percentage of my salary is more money. I guess the main thing too, to some extent, is we're a $400 million organization if you add up the aggregate. And so if you look at a salary that is, when the new contract is in place, will be about $235,000, not to make people guess. I think that's the first year. I'm not super driven by money, so I might even be getting that a little bit wrong. That's not out of whack for a $400 million business or, corporate organization in terms of size. So that is a relevant, I think, thing that the school board looked at. And as I mentioned, my salary is very much aligned, and in fact is lower than the other districts that are similar sized in Minnesota. But I don't want to sound like I'm whining. I'm grateful for it. I pretty much work 24/7 is my bad answer to your question of what I do for fun, Gabe. I mean, my reading is 15 minutes at night before I crash. So, but it's a good question, and I think I totally understand why people talk about it. The percentage increase was intentionally less than the percentage increase of our other employee groups, and the increase that I got year to year during my first contract was intentionally 2%. And I also set that when I got here, I requested less than the previous superintendent, not a lot less, but less. So I get it. It's a subject of discussion, and I just have to like hope that I'm doing a good enough job that people say, yeah, he's mostly worth the money. But we don't, it depends on your perspective.
Mhm. Well, my last question is, how good of an interviewer am I on a scale of 1 to 10? How would you rate me? Would you recommend me to your friends? And how much trouble are you going to be in for having spoken to me at all?
Um, I won't be in trouble. I will say that I mentioned it to one of our school board members, and they said, "You're doing what?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to Wes." I would say you are a 9 and only below Andy Brownell, who's a 10. I have to say, because Andy has all this experience. He's a pro. He does it professionally. And so I can't put you. Andy gives me monthly, so I put you just like below Andy, but no, I've appreciated this, opportunity, and it's always good to have people, and I think it's good that you asked about the transgender procedure and my salary. I think I welcome, kind of the hard questions, and even if you disagree with the answers, I hope people like take some heart the fact that I see it as a part of my job to answer whatever the questions are.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pekel, and we'll see you again someday.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that
And
sounds
I'm
great.
signed up to speak on the 17th at the school, so we'll see you then
It's
too.
been a while, so we've missed you. No, I can't say we. I don't know if anybody else has. I have. So I will not extrapolate from that. So all
I
right.
know the ladies miss me. They're attracted to what they fear, and vice
Oh
versa.
my. Well, that's your comment, not mine. So I will no comment on that.
Thank you,
All
Doc.
right. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.